Hi, this is Helen from Jupiter's Realm, and in this episode I'm taking a look at some of the more significant transits for the month of August, namely the upcoming aspects between Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, but I'll also be covering the Venus aspects to Mars and Saturn too. There'll be a conjunction between Mars and Jupiter, squares between Mars and Saturn, Jupiter and Saturn, Venus and Mars, Venus and Jupiter, and an opposition between Venus and Saturn. These aspects are in play through sign-based configurations for most of the month, peaking around the dates where the aspects go exact. We have two of the most positive planets and two more challenging planets all in play at the same time around the perfection dates, and it paints quite an entangled, complicated and multi-layered story, with contrary and dual significations coming through at the same time, with some stuff to work out between the Gemini and Pisces parts of the chart, Gemini and Virgo parts, and Virgo and Pisces parts, which may involve having to navigate differences. So there's a lot going on, but I hope I can bring out the main points for you and help unpack some of this. Some of these themes that I'll be talking about may be more indicative of what's happening on a collective or on the mundane level, but they may be more personally relevant for you if you have planets or angles in your birth chart around 16 or 17 degrees of the mutable signs. In traditional astrology, we consider aspects as most acute within a 3-degree orb, so you can look at a range of between 13 to 21 of the mutable signs for the Mars, Saturn and Jupiter aspects that I'll be covering, as this is when these will be tied to and interacting with those planets or angles in your birth chart, so they'll be making conjunctions, squares or oppositions, and that's when the influences may be most prominent. I just want to mention as well that Jupiter in Gemini will itself be in a sign-based square with Saturn through to May 2025, so we can expect to see an undertone of the significations of this aspect pervading through this period. But again, it may be most notable near the dates when those squares come through by degree, which is in August and then again in December. But let's start with the Mars-Jupiter conjunction. Now Mars entered Gemini in July, and it will be trailing behind Jupiter quite closely within a 3-degree range from about the first week of August. And so we could be really feeling this coming through from then. And then it makes the conjunction with Jupiter on the 13th at 16 Gemini. I recently did a video on what Jupiter in Gemini means, so if you'd like more of a deep dive into that, then please do check that out. But basically, Jupiter represents growth, expansion and abundance, and creating a cohesive environment so that growth is possible. It's a planet of good fortune and opportunities, overcoming difficulties and finding relief from troubles. It signifies the higher ideals we have, and wisdom, faith and optimism, as well as religion, spirituality and a moral sense of justice. It's generally associated with bringing positive or uplifting circumstances and outcomes. So in Gemini, it's doing these Jupiterian things in relation to mercurial topics, since Mercury rules Gemini. And so we're talking about intellectual pursuits, communication, how we share, take in, collect and analyse information and ideas, strategy, skillfulness, technology, travel and commerce. And so what Jupiter is trying to do here is bring improvements, amplify, grow and expand these topics, and also relates them to matters around justice, higher ideals and beliefs. It's about big or grand ideas and bringing meaning and purpose to matters. Gemini is a mutable sign, and Mercury itself signifies agility, adaptability and changeability and a quick pace. So there's a lot of movement and a restlessness and moving between multiple options, ideas and activities that's built into this sign, which therefore relates to what Jupiter's doing here. As an air sign, there's also a social component, and Jupiter is also about having connections with like-minded people, and so that's part of the story here too. Mercury is retrograde at this time, so this could include making revisions to ideas or strategies, or the way that we learn, teach, or how we engage with commerce or communicate that comes through as an eventual result. Mars represents fiery, dynamic actions and expressions. It's about assertion, confidence, passion, focus, and drive and independence. But also, as Mars is a god of war, it does signify aggression and sort of protective or defensive behaviours, impulsiveness, but also courage and a risk-taking approach. Mars has sudden and fast qualities, so it's adding some speed to what is already a fast-paced environment. And in conjunction to Jupiter, that can really be amplified. So there may be a sense of acceleration around those mercurial and Jupiterian matters, or the house topics where Gemini falls in your chart in general. It may feel like a sudden growth spurt, and this may come with an exuberance, optimism and determination to really move and expand things quickly, confidently and assertively. There's a really can-do, adventurous spirit to this, and I think there may be an almost quest-like impulse and drive behind that, maybe with a zeal and intensity, and using bold strategies. Or there could be a competitive or entrepreneurial factor, and this is all powering this Jupiterian impulse. Mars in Gemini is very strategic as well, so we could see that as part of the story here. Because Mars is engaging with Jupiter, Jupiter's benefic qualities helps make Mars a little bit less disruptive and impulsive than it might normally be. But there still may be some level of sudden disruption around these matters. But because we're dealing with Jupiter, there's also the potential for being able to find opportunities and solutions to overcome any challenges around this. It might still feel quite hectic though because of that added active dynamic stimulus from Mars. And so something to watch for is mental overstimulation or trying to do too much too quickly. Jupiter is in detriment here in Gemini, which points to a tendency to overdo things or for overextension. In Gemini, we can have a curiosity and interest in a multitude of activities, and with Jupiter amplifying that, it could feel very overwhelming or like you're being pulled in a million different directions with a million different choices all at once, not sure which way to go first and what to start first. And that can hinder being able to make any progress. And Mars coming in to conjoin Jupiter can make that feel more intense as well. This conjunction can also indicate matters around having faith or courage in our ideas, or defending or challenging ideas, beliefs or values, perhaps even our ideas of justice and law. Some caution is needed though because of the potential mix of both aggression and wisdom. This pairing in Gemini here can bring overzealous, dogmatic ideas, beliefs and language, or domineering actions based on a sense of righteous, philosophical, moral or religious extremism. And there may also be this dual quality of needing to be free and independent whilst being part of some kind of social collective or community as well. As this is a conjunction, it's the start of a new Mars-Jupiter cycle, which is like a seeding moment. It's a good time to consider where and how we want to focus our actions and goals in order to bring improvements to our life, more abundance, wisdom or growth. And intellectual matters and our ideas and choices and social interactions may also be part of that. There may be questions to consider about what do we want to fight for or defend in relation to our highest ideals and to what we know, believe or think and what we have faith in, or to spirituality, justice or bringing compassion and healing. And what brings most meaning and purpose to life in those respects? How do our actions help support growth and success? And how do they align with our ideals and our beliefs? Now may be the time to look at what opportunities there are or strategies that we can take advantage of or create to help us start this fresh new cycle based on answers to those questions. And so I think this will add to the longer story of the Jupiter-Saturn square, which I mentioned goes through to 2025. Just as Mars begins to separate from Jupiter, we have this square coming through between Mars and Saturn by degree on the 15th of August. Which is kind of like running full speed into a wall for Mars because Saturn has contrasting qualities of coolness, a slow pace, being cautious, contemplative and controlled. Given Saturn's superior position in the square, it's imposing restraint on Mars, indicating some tempering of Mars's speed and bringing in a more cautious influence. Saturn's about having a calm, measured approach, cooling down some of that passion and desire to move quickly and suddenly or impulsively. Saturn's influence is like saying, okay, let's just have a realistic look and a reflection on what's happening, what's trying to be achieved, where is this going, what are the consequences, what does it really entail and how committed can we be to that? And it might feel a bit frustrating because compared to the enthusiasm and optimism and quick pace of Mars, and in relation to Jupiter, which is still pretty close by aspect to both Mars and Saturn at the same time, it could feel very much like a wet blanket being thrown and all that enthusiasm and energy to get going. And because Mars is still so very close to Jupiter, it's still getting some of that Jupiterian influence to go big and be expansive. So Mars here is dealing with these contrary qualities, and it could feel like being torn between going big and bold and having to hold back and be cautious. So Mars and Gemini square Saturn here with this Jupiterian influence. This is likely to be about the need to take active measures to make some compromises or make decisions about where to most productively focus your energy and get a more measured pace and some tangible practical foundations to what we're trying to do around the Gemini house. So that energy and time that's invested is sustainable and helps build growth which has longevity. Mars and Saturn working together can be quite a powerhouse for having steady and enduring focused determination and action. Then straight after this, on the 16th, we get Jupiter itself making a square by degree with Saturn. And whereas Jupiter is about growth, expansion, abundance and optimism, Saturn represents boundaries and limitations, contractions, burdens and sombre tones. Saturn here is bringing up a need for some realism about all this enthusiasm and increase on what we believe to be true and just. And in a similar way to the Mars-Saturn square, it may throw up frictions between having freedom to act or feeling liberated and being restrained or having a more conservative with a small c approach. And it can raise questions about what's possible in a manageable, practical way and how that can support further growth and improvements. There may be some lofty visions and big ideas for the future here and hope for what can be achieved, and some of that may have a noble or heroic quality about it. But is that rooted in reality, or is it just intellectual ideas that don't have substance, and can they stand the test of time? As with Mars, Saturn is in a superior position here, so its influence may feel like the dominating one. But Saturn is in Jupiter's domicile of Pisces, and so it has reception with Jupiter, which does make it a little easier to find agreement here than it might be otherwise, because it creates a relationship between the two. Saturn is residing in Jupiter's house. And this also gives what Jupiter is doing here in Gemini more weight and influence on Saturn in Pisces in terms of eventual outcomes. So there's a lot of interplay here between the one and the other. I think the square will raise questions of how the emotional and intuitive and the felt spiritual side of being or circumstances from the Pisces side can be harmonised with the intellectual, rational focus elicited by Jupiter and Mars and Gemini, and how substance and structure as a foundation can further the goals of ideological visions and expressions, and how to successfully navigate the tensions between faith and reason, despair versus hope, burden versus relief, or obligations versus freedom. And this square indicates that some adjustments will be needed to manage that. As I mentioned, Mars conjunct Jupiter and Gemini does speak to strong ideological expressions, and so I think Saturn could be highlighting the need here for some responsible restraint around that as well. And this aspect can also signify having to let go of something, the death or end of something, or needing to pare back, prioritise or simplify the Jupiter and Gemini matters that we're dealing with in some way, in order to be able to make progress in a sustained and manageable way. Mars itself signifies the cutting away or loss of something. So with both Mars and Saturn interacting with Jupiter around the same time, we have these signatures here for the stripping away or reduction of something Jupiterian, or what Jupiter's doing in Gemini, whilst simultaneously trying to grow something and bring things together in a way that's cohesive. That might mean cutting back or limiting growth, or the end of certain ideals, or the limiting or restraint of justice or law, spiritual pursuits or beliefs. It may involve needing to relinquish some ideals about justice or faith, or having to simplify or prioritise ideas, activities and the sharing of information, and slowing things down so that something more focused and sustainable can be built going forward. It may also require a willingness to address more challenging matters or to take on the hard work necessary to achieve the goals and hopes for the future that we're aiming for. As I mentioned earlier, Jupiter being in its sign of its detriment can sometimes point to a tendency to overdo things and to create a more sort of scattered effect. So this aspect from Saturn can help bring in some awareness of the need for more clarity, for structure, for simplifying matters, so that we can actually make some progress rather than feeling pulled in multiple different directions and going nowhere. This might feel like a frustrating time. On the one hand, there's an impulse to move forward quickly, a feeling that yes, we can do this, let's go for it now, and then having to perhaps come to a halt or be delayed because of a need to deal with more sobering realities and considerations, or practical responsibilities or duties, which those goals that we have relating to Jupiter and Mars and Gemini have to align with in order to be able to make headway. So this square aspect is about reassessment, refinement or compromise about how or what we're doing in this Gemini part of the chart, and what can be realistically achieved whilst meeting obligations from the Pisces part. examining where best to focus our efforts or help, and what to prioritise or streamline. Saturn is retrograde as well, so this could point to an already ongoing process of dissolution or the revision of something that's already been established, that's foundational, things like rules or organisations, structures, obligations or traditions, and reviewing or rebuilding these in some way, or what's established being challenged, and that might need to be factored into the Jupiter and Mars and Gemini growth and activities as well. There may be some weighty emotions to consider in all of this too. Pisces is a water sign, dealing in the emotional realm, and Saturn present here can indicate deep, heavy or melancholic emotions, in contrast to the more jovial, optimistic and exuberant signature of Jupiter and Mars and Gemini. So that lighter tone may be being toned down by a more serious or sombre tone, and a consideration of more weighty emotional topics as part of what's going on with Jupiter and Gemini here. But in all of this, Jupiter does still provide some opportunities, help, assistance or solutions that can be tapped into to help deal with all of this. Jupiter doesn't start separating from Saturn by degree until the 23rd, and even then it's still close by right through to the end of the month. It's at 19 Gemini on the 30th, so still in a tight orb by degree. And so I think these Jupiter-Saturn square significations and energy will linger in a prominent way throughout the rest of August. Now, in addition to this, we have Venus coming into the mix too later on the 19th, forming a T-square with Jupiter and Saturn from 17 Virgo, with some palpable influence from Mars at 19 Gemini coming through already at this point. And so this is quite a mixed bag for Venus, with contrary qualities coming in to influence her at the same time. Now, Venus is a planet of love, friendship, unity, harmony, beauty and the arts. And in Virgo, it's about the refinement and tangible expressions of bringing beauty and harmony to the material world or to relationships. It brings through a desire to improve things and provide value or service to these, or to the Virgo house topics in your chart. Venus here speaks to our ideas of what the perfect harmonious relationship or piece of art or craft can be, and the iterative process of analysing and refining those to get the best quality or the most perfect form of those. Mercury, the ruler of Virgo, is an aversion to Venus. It's in Leo, so traditionally this would be interpreted as Mercury not being able to provide all the resources required to support that. So maybe a sense of having to make do with less in some way and making the best out of that, or having less quality resources to draw on to help further our goals around these Venusian matters. But the superior square from Jupiter does indicate some help coming through, with some lovely possibilities here for exploring and enhancing relationships and pleasure, and creating connections based on what we find inspirational and of value, and creating a sense of freedom and fairness in those as well. It encourages finding new opportunities for growth and learning around relationships or creative pursuits, and finding meaning and purpose through those, and that may come with a sense of enthusiasm and hope about what can be achieved, even if it means having to do a bit more work into getting something out of what is available. Venus in Virgo is in her fall here. It's opposite to her sign of exaltation in Pisces. And this can indicate perfectionist tendencies regarding relationships and beauty and finding harmony. And so there may need to be some mindfulness about not letting that go to extremes, as Jupiter also has an amplifying effect which may exacerbate that. Her opposition to Saturn indicates a situation which might impose some restriction or delay around relationship matters, joy or pleasure in general. It may feel like these are being blocked or held back in some way, and that could be due to commitments, duties or responsibilities that are pulling attention away from that, and being forced to have a reality check or to face a challenge that comes up that impacts the Venusian topics or the house topics of where Virgo falls in your chart. If this transit is more personal for you, some of that oppositional tension might come through the Pisces house topics of your birth chart. Saturn is in Venus's exaltation, so there's a Venusian connection to Saturn that I think does help mitigate any challenges somewhat and provide a bit more ability to create some harmony here. But I think because this is Saturn, we can still expect this opposition to potentially bring up some level of pressure and strain in relationships and about the things that we enjoy in life. But it might not be to the extent of encountering insurmountable obstacles. The question will be how to honour joy and pleasure, love and friendship, whilst meeting obligations and the practicalities of time and limitations that are coming up, especially from that Pisces part of the chart. With Venus being in fall and in opposition to Saturn, That could exacerbate those overly critical or perfectionist tendencies I mentioned of Venus and Virgo. So there might need to be some caution about being too restrictive or judgmental about our ideas of how we think relationships, beauty or pleasure should be or be expressed, as that could end up hindering rather than helping. Something else this aspect could speak to is matters around women, perhaps women in difficult or disadvantaged situations, and dealing with the obstacles or challenges around that. So in general, Venus here is trying to make connections to create relationships and things of beauty and harmony, and refine and improve them, but it's getting pushback or having to deal with some heavy topics and stark realities through this other channel of Saturn in Pisces, which is calling for more restriction, more patience, responsibility, commitment or clarity. Venus is in an earth sign and Saturn in water, so overall it might feel like having to swing between trying to be practical and grounded and having to honour deep emotional needs or topics, or between being analytical or rational and being more intuitive, soulful and sensitive. It might not be possible to hold the two at the same time, instead having to make space for one and then the other, and a process of switching between the two. With some care and attention here, I think that there's still some good things that we can draw on from Venus. Venus can help show us a way to bring diplomacy, harmony, togetherness, love and joy, but it might mean needing to put more effort and work and conscious awareness into creating that, rather than it flowing naturally and easily around this time. Now following on from this opposition, just as Venus begins to separate from Saturn, she makes a square by degree to Mars on the 23rd at 22 Virgo. And this might feel like having had some restraints or challenges indicated by Saturn, which is starting to loosen up a little bit and being able to bring in some more forward momentum again. Perhaps even with some greater clarity or insight gained through having had to negotiate those challenges from Saturn. And we do still have Jupiter, not far by degree, but certainly by sign still in a superior aspect to Venus, trying to bring some help through by creating conditions or opportunities for improvement, healings or blessings. Now this is a square between Venus and Mars, so it will still require some attention to any tensions building between a more aggressive approach or a need to express independence and individuality coming from Mars, and that of wanting to create togetherness and peace from Venus. The Venus-Mars square could indicate creative or relationship tensions, having to navigate power dynamics in relationships, or standing up for relationships or ideas of what beauty, harmony and pleasure mean. And it can also bring out passion and expressiveness to Venusian matters as well. Being in Mercury-ruled signs, I think keeping communication open and having conversations, discussing and negotiating will be an important part to navigate any tensions that might be present. And being in mutable signs brings in flexibility and adaptability, which can help being able to negotiate and to find compromises or adjustments and get something workable and manageable going forward. So overall, with Venus, Mars and Jupiter in Mercury-ruled signs, there's a strong mental, rational and social focus to this series of aspects, which contrasts to the emotional realm of Saturn coming through. So there's something here about how do we engage with the mental realm and the realm of ideas and facts, whilst dealing with the deeper and expansive emotional needs and desires, or the realm of intuition, felt senses or the spiritual. And then we have the two benefic planets, Jupiter and Venus, indicating desires to bring improvement, opportunity, abundance and good fortune, and healing and connection to the Mercury houses of Gemini and Virgo. And in contrast to Saturn, which can separate and contracts, limits or brings obstacles to bear on those houses at the same time, but which can also bring clarity and longevity to what we're trying to do. Saturn is in the domicile of Jupiter and the exaltation of Venus, whilst engaging with both of those planets, helping the possibility for harmonising or accommodating the differences between Saturn and these benefics. These contrary archetypal qualities at play all at once could feel tricky to negotiate this month, I think, and being adaptable and willing to change perspectives or approaches will be really helpful, as well as keeping an eye on the bigger picture and core priorities. And something else to consider is that, whilst delays or limitations can feel frustrating, it can allow space for time to reflect and really look at what's happening and see if some course correction is needed, or if more information or clarity is needed, or a more realistic approach to support those long-term goals and needs. With all these aspects occurring in mutable signs, there's a strong signature for having to deal with a lot of change, digressions or diversions, and so things may not progress in a straightforward and linear way, but they will get there in the end. It might just mean some twists and turns along the way, and so I think we need to be open to that. Both Saturn and Jupiter signify wisdom, so I think there's also an opportunity for some profound and deep points of learning, some insights to be gained, even if things feel messy and confusing at times. I think the key this month will be how to recognise, honour or adapt to the realities and limitations or obligations that exist that perhaps can't be avoided, whilst remaining optimistic and being committed to continued healing or growth and harmony in general and in our social connections, and to explore different strategies and ideas that can help with that, focusing on what's meaningful, what brings value and what's necessary as the main priorities. So I hope that you find this helpful for August. If you have any comments or questions, please do leave them. I'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like to hear more astrological news and forecasts, please do subscribe to my channel or to my newsletter. Till next time, take care. Bye for now.